Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TBR's Business Intelligence Business Quarterly Review webcast, delving into the recent results of our BI benchmark. I'm Allison Crawford, and I'm hosting today's webinar. Business intelligence software vendors will align portfolios and go-to-market strategies with customers' evolving BI needs in 2014. Embedding BI functionality into applications enables vendors to balance serving advanced BI customers who have considerable experience and know exactly what tools they need to expand deployments, and basic BI customers, but do not yet know what they need. In the next 45 minutes, we'll cover what's shaping this market and what business models you should be aware of. Before I pass this over to Matt and Elizabeth, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover. First, we're recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit our channel to watch this presentation or any of the others we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the materials we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments to the Q&A or chat function. Matt and Elizabeth will address them at the end of the presentation. Or if you'd like to set up a client inquiry for more detailed discussion, please reach out directly to either analyst at the end of the webinar to set up that conversation. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. You can also find these slides as well as other thought leadership pieces, webinar decks and commentaries on SlideShare at www.slideshare.net/TBR_market_insight. And I'll share all these social media links with you again at the end of our conversation. Now let me introduce Matt Healy and Elizabeth Hedstrom-Heinlein. Elizabeth is our lead analyst covering enterprise software and has been working closely with the vendors covered in this report to understand their business models and strategies. Matt has over 15 years of experience in global software and services research and leads our software research team as a principal analyst. Their expertise and perspective is unequaled, bringing unequaled value to clients with their research. And with that, let me hand this over to Matt.
Thank you, Allison. And before I toss this over to Elizabeth, who can go into the details on what's covered in this webinar, I wanted to take a step back and kind of set the stage for what we're seeing in the BI and analytics market as a whole. Now, I had the privilege of attending SAP's CRM conference last week out in Las Vegas, and as part of that conference was able to speak with quite a number of customers who were both on the SAP platform or considering the platform. And what they told me over the course of the week was very similar to what I've heard across the board from a lot of other customers that I've spoken with. The fact is that we're coming to a point where the embedding of analytics and the analytics capabilities both in-app and outside of app is really beginning to get to a point where you can quickly and easily move the needle on some of the financial decisions and some of the business process decisions that these customers have to make. The software is getting very powerful, the databases are getting very powerful, and being able to do real-time data analytics and really optimize your business and optimize the decisions that you're making from both a tactical and a strategic area was very, very apparent. Further, what we're seeing from a lot of the tools manufacturers and a lot of the analytics platforms is the simplicity of use. So it's no longer the fact that these are very complicated and difficult to use, tools to use. I had a great conversation with one customer who basically explained to me that neither she nor I were Nate Silver. And if you know who Nate Silver is, he runs the very good analytics site with 538. He's been very good at predicting a lot of things. Well, the fact is, he's exceptional in his data analytics capabilities, and there are very few genuinely exceptional people. But as you begin to start simplifying the software and the interfaces, you allow people who aren't Nate Silver to also be able to benefit from the analytics. And so that's really what we're seeing, a real expansion of the market to analytics, not just for data scientists, but analytics for the rest of us. So with that as a market overview, I'm going to now hand the presentation over to Elizabeth, who can go through what the vendors are seeing. So Elizabeth, against that backdrop.
Thanks, Matt. So let's set the stage. I see from our attendees we've got some new friends and clients on the line this time, so I thought I'd set a brief stage with where this benchmark that we're talking about today fits into our broader business intelligence research. What you see on the screen in front of you right now is an overview of TBR's business intelligence research portfolio. And I think the big takeaway here for all of you is that this is one aspect of a research program that really extends from buyer decision-making and evaluation all the way through to how vendors are reacting in response, and also encompasses the full lens of the decision from solution evaluation to purchase to implementation. So we work very closely with our professional services colleagues to really understand not just what is being purchased and why, but how the software vendors are evolving to respond and how the services vendors are then moving to create new opportunities for themselves to drive growth in this market that is maturing but by no means mature. And let's see, Allison, I think, do I have control here? Yes, I do. Fabulous. When we look at the business intelligence software market, we evaluate this landscape across 4 key software segments. And this really stems from our first understanding of our first round of research with buyers that talked about, that they talked to us about what was their path to business intelligence. And it really started with those basic and advanced BI tools, those point products of answering either fundamental data comprehension needs around reporting and dashboarding, or even more advanced needs around data visualization, data predictive analytics, etc. Those solutions have since evolved into what we term the applications and platform segment. So the big definitional difference there is that the basic tool, the advanced tool, it's a point product. It has a single or a dual purpose deployment of BI functionality. The applications and platforms are those that really extend beyond that. So they're looking at multiple points of functionality in a single product. And then underpinning all of that, data warehousing. And TBR looks at this market very specifically around the data warehousing and information management products that are deployed in support of business intelligence, which is a segment of the market, not the full extent of the market, as from our conversations with customers, from our conversations with vendors, there is still a segment of that data warehousing market that is static and assembled for archiving purposes only, so we exclude those from our analysis for this purpose. And then finally, business intelligence and analytics engineered systems. And this is something where if that's of particular interest to anyone on the line, we did not include it in today's webinar, but we're happy to discuss it at length. This is intended to be seen as the answer to the following question. Of those vendors deriving software revenue in the business intelligence market, what portion of that revenue is being delivered on top of a box, and what is the related hardware revenue pull-through as a result? So this is additive to the 4 segments we just outlined and should be seen as a universe unto itself. And when we look at our taxonomy subsegments, these are the components that I touched on briefly a moment ago. When we speak with buyers, they really still identify their own maturity of business intelligence around what tools they have in place, how broadly deployed they are in their environments. And so I'll actually go bottom up for a moment. The idea of basic tools, I think it still mystifies us to this day, and it's a fascinating conversation with those customers that are still just getting into BI. You're still looking at folks using Excel for reporting and queries, and fundamental deployments of online analytical processing tools just to get an understanding of what they have in-house. Now, we went alphabetically in terms of the way the stack is built because I wanted this to be readable for all of you. Advanced tools is on the next slide. We'll talk to that in a moment. So from reporting really to data discovery, how do you know what you already have? Applications and platforms, really, how do you integrate, summarize, and I would say add additional processes and rigor to the BI deployments you have in-house? You deploy dedicated analytic apps and platforms. You embed analytics into your business applications. So that is a very specific point of revenue recognition for those analytic components. And finally, you expand on your performance management application deployments. So that's half of the stack. And then from here we look to the advanced tools, and this is where we really see most of the current disruptive technology buying currently underway. Predictive analytics, data mining, event processing, data visualization, and content analytics. And content analytics really extends from everything from customer and marketing analytics all the way into those social tools that you see a lot of in recent cloud acquisitions. So how do you really take your customer deployment of BI from here's what I know I have into a what do I think is coming in and how can I get ready to react? And then finally data warehousing, as we just discussed a moment ago. So those are the four segments that we analyze, and by the way, please feel free to fire questions in as we go, folks, because we're really looking forward to hearing from you on this. But from there, we'll take a look at key takeaways from our Business Intelligence Software Vendor Benchmark from this quarter. And for those of you that are new to our discussions, a very quick overview of why we're talking about calendar fourth quarter in April of 2014. When we look at our syndicated coverage, we tie our benchmark publications to the earnings cycle. So when you look at the number of vendors in this benchmark, we have over 30 at this point. When we have, we'll say, folks that are later in the reporting calendar, such as Hewlett-Packard being an example of that, as well as Salesforce.com, we really hold our benchmarks until after those last vendors have released. Then we pull together our numbers from fourth quarter, and what we try to put together here is a point-in-time view of quarterly performance, along with with our forward-looking analysis of where we think the market is then going to go. So these benchmarks should really be reviewed as both a snapshot in time as well as a forward-looking view of where we think vendors are moving and reacting in relatively real time. So our three takeaways that we wanted to cover in today's webinar. As I said earlier, business intelligence is maturing. It is by no means mature, and we see a lot of vendor activity shifting from research and development exclusively to a much more balanced sales and marketing approach. How do you keep your customers engaged in buying more, especially in the case of the multi-line vendors like IBM, SAP, Oracle, HP, to create those opportunities for bigger picture license revenue growth, with business intelligence still being a top priority for a lot of customers. And again, for different reasons. I think you still have a lot of lagging adopters who now know that they need to get into this and don't know where to start. But you also have a lot of early adopters who are now trying to reconcile very departmental, very one-off deployments of business intelligence and looking to vendors for help. We talked about basic and advanced tools briefly, and again, you'll see a lot of the vendors who have functionality that would normally identify them in a basic tools or an advanced tools segment. We class them within applications and platforms because of the multifaceted aspect of their product. But it's worth noting, we think, that basic BI tools and advanced BI tools, we see the multi-line vendors continuing to watch this segment very closely. How do you either develop or acquire some of these disruptive technologies like predictive analytics? I think we've had 2 acquisitions in that space in the last 6 months. And how do you create those how do you bring those technologies in-house to accelerate the impact of your own solutions development and sales for your install-based customers? Because right now, I think when you've got 5 vendors, the 4 multi-lines I mentioned, along with SaaS, really controlling more than 65% of the revenue in this market, it doesn't take a whole lot of an SAP's install base to make a Tableau software very happy. So install-based defense is really the name of the game for the big players in this market, and targeted install-based assaults around a heterogeneous story. How does my tool work in an IBM environment, in an SAP environment? That's where you see the pure plays really starting to make some hay against some of the larger vendors. And then finally, looking at some of the pure play firms, who are those firms that are in this market to stay versus building themselves up to potentially be acquired? We see Splunk and Pentaho really looking at evolving their business models to be something that is more sustainable over time. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So going into a little more detail around the business intelligence software market, this is TBR's assessment of the business intelligence software market, both in terms of previous performance as well as our projections going forward. And we maintain that this market is going to demonstrate some steady, stable growth over the coming quarters. You'll notice that the relative ricochets of quarterly performance are really impacted by the fact that of the 5 vendors I mentioned a moment ago, 2 of those vendors, Microsoft and Oracle, continue to have their fiscal years and their calendar years be somewhat out of sync. So that's where you see a real, what we refer to internally as the double bump in terms of the revenue performance for these vendors. But it was a strong close to the year with double-digit growth across the landscape as we project it, and 8% growth across the vendors as we cover them. Outperforming broader license revenue growth and emphasizing that where spending is happening, this is a critical area of spend for customers and a critical area of spend for vendors to attach themselves to. So the big players remain the revenue drivers, but it's the disruptive players like I'll call out Splunk again, in this idea of machine-to-machine data, I think is really starting to quantify what big data actually can mean in a more systemic way rather than a more vendor-by-vendor way. That's really where you see new areas, new adjacent areas of opportunity being added to this market over time. Matt, anything you'd want to add here?
No, I think that you've captured it really well, and one of the things that's always that's always interested me is, from a BI perspective, is this bifurcation of the market that's going on. You talked about Splunk really being able to capture what machine-to-machine capabilities and big data and analytics means. They're a perfect example of some of the out-of-app markets for BI and for intelligence, and I'm talking by out of apps, not the embedded CRM or supply chain analytics that somebody like an SAP or an Oracle will roll out, which also can add value. I think if you look at Splunk, there's an example of an organization that doesn't have applications but has a niche, understands what it's doing. It's all about machine-to-machine communications, and they found a way to really add value to their customers without being embedded in an application. And so you really do see 2 distinct markets. Clearly, you can look at what SAP does with their analytics around SuccessFactors and CRM, and what Oracle does with the analytics around their business applications, but that's not the entire market. And I think that the market will continue to exist based on what these 2 different segments of it are doing. So I remember a while back the question is applications going to be embedded in app, or is it going to be outside of app? And my answer to that at this point in time is yes.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
I will pass it to that.
And I think the interesting takeaway as we've been watching this internally, not just in our team but across teams, is the ties of the business intelligence market to on-premise license sales continues to remain a predominant driver of behavior in this market, both for vendors and for customers. So while this market is, I think, definitively out of the, I'll say, aggressive growth rates that are being driven by the cloud vendors historically, I think you are going to see a lot more consistency and stability in this growth, and I think it is going to continue, because this is where a lot of those vendors are, a lot of those on-premise vendors are concentrating their time and their energy and their investment right now. So it's the enterprise software market, I think right now, especially in the application space, it's a story of growth at any cost. Well, this is the low-hanging fruit for 2014, and I would argue for 2015 as well.
And so Elizabeth, I just want to add to that in terms of the growth at all costs and the defense of existing install base for the applications vendors. I'm seeing a lot of activity amongst the application vendors in terms of embedding analytics capabilities into their software as a way to prevent customers from doing some of the in-app analytics on outside platforms so that they can prevent customers from migrating to somebody else. I think that you really start seeing that from the big app vendors, and one of their arguments is if you just use our entire business suite, then not only can we do in-app analytics that are limited to, say, CRM or supply chain, but we can start running simulations across your entire enterprise using all of our applications. And so it starts out as defense, but then it gets much more into, and by the way, if you were using all of our applications and ran your entire business on insert name of large applications vendor here, then you'd be in such better shape. And so I've seen a lot of that. Just wanted to add
I would
that
agree.
comment. So I'll pass it back to you.
No, thank you, and thank you all for bearing with us. We're in multiple locations today, so we're doing our handoffs a lot more explicitly than Matt and I usually would. Usually we'd just be tossing a ball across the room. Now, looking at slide 12, this is a snapshot from the benchmark itself, and this is the vendors in this market, and you'll notice it's a very diverse segment of vendors that we cover. Of the 31 vendors currently in this space, they run the gamut from analytical platforms to dedicated content analytics, data warehousing, and information management players. We run the gamut. But I think the key takeaway for us and for all of you is that this holistic way of looking at this market really ensures that it's not only a competitive narrative that we're sharing with you, but a potential partnership narrative as well. There are points of integration that customers are looking for that extend not only to the data itself, but how that data can be used and monetized, and where vendors have been telling us very specifically, our competition is here. And we've been able to tell them, well, yes, we see that, but we also see a lot of synergies between what MarkLogic is doing and what Cloudera is doing in terms of where platforms can come together and with $1 of investment from either party deliver $5 of return for customers. So a maturing market, I think, creates a lot of opportunities for not just a competitive narrative, but an alliance-driven narrative and a next stage narrative for growth as well. So that's where we really try to bring everybody together onto this one snapshot slide just so you can see how diverse the players are in this space. And in calendar 4Q13, the story was Hadoop. We're going to put we have the dartboard in Matt's and my shared office that talks about, what's our 2014 prediction. The story is the maturation of Hadoop, and looking at Hortonworks, looking at Cloudera, looking at Intel's recent investment in Cloudera, I think it's finally Hadoop's time to come center stage, not just in a very segmented view of what big data is and can be, but what Hadoop can do in terms of transforming the broader discussion around business intelligence. And the vendors that are really driving significant amounts of venture funding, including DataStax, who's running off of a Cassandra distribution, as well as Hortonworks and Cloudera, much more known quantities. These are now vendors positioned to catch the attention of partners across not only Tier 1, but geographic and regional distributions to really set the stage and define, this is what we see Hadoop becoming, and this is the transformative benefit for customers that Hadoop can bring to their environment. And I think you're going to see a lot of the larger vendors, including Oracle, just as an example, with their recent refresh of their NoSQL database, looking at how to come a little bit closer to Hadoop to ensure that no one is left behind in being able to tell that story for customers. It's worth calling out as well that we see IBM's recent acquisition of Cloudant as a critical step to not only take on some of the high-growth pure-play vendors in this space like DataStax, but also really look at how you can better tackle how IBM can even more effectively tackle the broader database market and bring products like DB2 back into the broader discussion against SAP HANA and the Oracle database. So going a little bit deeper in this market, we were talking about basic and advanced tools, and as you see from our snapshot of the basic and advanced tools segments, this is where we see a lot of folks really focusing on the core strengths that they first brought to this market. So for SAP, that's a lot of the business object suite. For IBM, you're really looking at SPSS and Cognos as some key products that fit in here. And then the rising points of discussion are Informatica and Google, these folks that are really looking at information management as a path to broader growth. And I think that's a big takeaway for us, is that how does information management really start to come into business intelligence as a bridge, not only across business intelligence deployments for customers, but also into other areas of customers' deployments? Because for vendors that have these information management tools in-house, they really can use them to set up a lot of broad-based cross-selling. And for folks like Informatica, where it's all that they do, that makes them the belle of the ball right now. We see a lot of opportunities for vendors to be accelerating and increasing partnerships with Informatica, and expect to see some further announcements from the Big Five in that area before the end of the year. So from pivoting from basic tools to advanced tools, and as we talked about the taxonomy a moment ago, this is really the area where we see the most disruptive technology segments coming into play. And predictive analytics continues to be the story in this segment. We see SPSS Analytic Answers, which IBM launched in 3Q13, as a truly differentiated product, not just for IBM, but differentiated in the market because it's an embedded offering. SAP is chasing that with its acquisition of Kexin and the subsequent launch of Infinite Insight, in terms of being able to create that opportunity for solution-driven growth around predictive analytics. And by that I mean you use predictive analytics if you are one of these multi-line vendors to ensure that they can that these vendors can actually show value in a high-interest technology, but also then create a simple path for customers to trace back into other areas of value in the IBM or SAP portfolios. Dell Software's March acquisition of StatSoft ensures that Dell will be entering this segment, if not effective 2Q14, certainly by the end of the calendar year. It's also worth noting that this is a semi-annual benchmark, but you will be seeing an update webinar from us in the next quarter around some of our recently launched primary research in this market, looking at buyer behaviors. So when we look at how vendors are actually operating in this market, this is a new quadrant that we launched in the benchmark this quarter, and I'm going to walk you through the next two slides almost in tandem. The ability for vendors to really make a business out of business intelligence is something that we didn't expect to see crystallizing quite this quickly. It's worth noting that we think that, again, as the ties to the on-premise business, rather than these more disruptive and transformative businesses like cloud and mobility, I think ensure that vendors that want to stay in this market are going to have to start playing like enterprise vendors in terms of how they behave as companies sooner rather than later. So we have two snapshots of this, and I'll just flip back and forth for a moment so you can see that we have the same graph. What we've done is divided it by what we view as multi-line vendors and then the rest. So on this slide, you'll note that the vertical line reflects the covered vendor median R&D as a percent of revenue, which is 26% for 4Q13. The horizontal line represents the covered vendor median sales and marketing as a percent of revenue, and that was 14%. And so that is our estimates around what percentage of BI revenue vendors are reinvesting in sales and marketing and R&D in support of this business. And that is the entire covered universe as reflected, but in order to make the quadrants legible, we actually split them up for you. So taking a look at the vendors in this graph, you'll notice that there is a distinct trending, and it is in line with enterprise software vendor behavior as an overall, that both sales and marketing and R&D do tend to fall as a percent of revenue in the fourth quarter. So the dots on the graph represent the vendor's position as of 2Q13. The arrow represents the vendor's position as of 4Q13. But it's worth noting that a couple of vendors are spending to buck the trend. When we look at vendors like Google, they are right on the average for R&D, and they are working on how do they increase sales and marketing spend in the relative spectrum, but it's coming at R&D's expense, and that runs very typical to how Google tends to set up their businesses. They will develop them for a particular point in time, and then it's time to monetize what they've built. So it's a sign, I think, that Google is thinking about what is its next big idea, and that may end up being outside of business intelligence overall. When we look at Oracle and HP Software, Oracle started in 2Q13 behind the average for R&D as a percent of revenue. They're now ahead of it and spending to increase. They're also spending to catch up to the average, or median, excuse me, spending to catch up to the median in terms of sales and marketing as a percent of revenue. And if you look at what the Oracle executive team has been saying for the last couple of weeks and months, they have clearly tagged business intelligence and analytics as two key phrases that can not only help them monetize what they already have, but set the stage for the forthcoming general availability of the 12C in-memory database. And that is, in our opinion, where Oracle has placed a significantly big bet for the balance of this calendar year, and one that they need to really think about how to shorten their own selling cycles. So that's where I think you see the early signs of where they're going with that. When we look at HP Software, this is a really good growth story for HP, and candidly, they're a firm in need of a growth story. So they're already ahead of the average in terms of research and development, as is shown by the recent launch of Haven. And they are looking at how best to continue that growth. Well, it's time to make sure that your sales and marketing teams are really set and incented with the right tools and financial motivation to get this portfolio out and into the market. So for slide 19, now we're looking at some of the more targeted players in this space, and I think it's, again, worth noting that for firms that are relatively smaller, with the exception of SAS would be in its as big as some of the multi-line vendors on the previous page, everyone tends to follow the trend here. Sales and marketing, R&D, both falling as a percent of revenue, with a couple of critical exceptions. I think the degree to which DataStax is actually trying to hold its own in terms of increasing sales and marketing as a percent of revenue shows that they know they have a story to tell. It is coming at the expense of research and development, but that is to be expected with some of these smaller firms. They've got to make their bets one way or the other. Pentaho is also looking at increasing its share of R&D, and that's where we think that that's an early signal of what is their next big idea for growth. How are they trying to think of their next wave now that they've really ridden their IPO momentum out? But then you have to look at Splunk. Splunk's ahead of the median in R&D and sales and marketing by a sizable margin, and they're continuing to spend to stay further ahead of that margin. So this is a company that is in this market to stay, and candidly, I think they're probably a really good partnering opportunity for a lot of those of you that are currently on the line. They want this market, they're in this market to stay, and they also are thinking about how do they really extend their own visibility around security and some of these other ancillary software markets that are critical points of concern for customers as they're thinking about business intelligence. So when we look ahead to this market for 2014 and 2015, we see Hadoop really positioned to continue to transform tools, but also set the stage for evolving and disrupting the currently stable data warehousing market. How do vendors tie their existing databases to Hadoop so effectively that it integrates rather than disrupts their customers? And then looking at how do you defend and expand your current install bases. You tie your basic BI tools to high growth markets like cloud. You use business intelligence as a path to revive license sales by continuing to expand the value currently embedded in your own business intelligence, in your own applications install bases. With that, I will hand it back to Allison to see if there are any questions in the queue.
Sure, there'll be a couple questions, Elizabeth, so if anyone has any questions, please do send them through now. The first question we have, everyone, is what are the best practices that you've seen customers use to maximize the results they get from analytics?
Okay, so Elizabeth, sorry if I'm going to step on you on this one, but having just come from the SAP CRM event and having had a lot of conversations with the customers, the ones that seem to have gotten the best results don't come at this from the perspective of, wow, this is BI and analytics. I wonder what problem I can solve. They come at it from the perspective of, this is the most pressing challenge or most pressing issue I have within my organization, and then they use a suite of approaches, including big data and analytics, to come at that. So it's not so much of the, I've got a brand new tool and I've got a brand new hammer, so everything's going to look like a nail to me. It is more along the lines of, I've got this problem, which tool in the toolbox or combination of them is going to get me the best results? So, Elizabeth, any thoughts or comments?
Oh, I think it's, if I had to summarize the best practices up and the market up, I would use the same word. It's accretive to existing behaviors, to existing installations. This is a value add market rather than a new way of consumption market.
And we just had a follow-up question that came through about pitfalls and potential pitfalls that we see coming up. And the fact is that as I'm watching a lot of customers dip their toes into these markets, the initial results you can get in terms of the improvement to business decision-making can be really quite spectacular. You can see a lot of things that you wouldn't ordinarily understand and feel like the decisions are great. The temptation is then to, once again, just assume that analytics can fix every business problem, and it can fix a lot of them. It can help fix even more. It cannot fix all of them. So what I think we're probably going to end up with is, in 3 or 4 years, we're going to end up having a lot of organizations have misused some of the power of the analytics and the big data that they have and have made what in retrospect seem to be very poor decisions. Remember, analytics and data without context and understanding does not get you the results that you would that you're interested in.
Okay. Looks like we don't have any other questions in queue right now, so I'm going to talk really slow in case somebody wants to send something through now. So with that, I think we'll start to wrap up. So as I mentioned, I was going to share all the social media links with you, so I do encourage everyone to follow Matt and Elizabeth on their Twitter handles listed here, as well as the TBR Twitter handle, and join us on our SlideShare, YouTube, and LinkedIn pages. We have a couple of things that are going to be coming out, so everyone should keep an eye out for them. We are sending out some information on our entire BI portfolio across both software and services, so keep an eye out for that. And as Elizabeth mentioned, we are going to be doing this webinar again, so look for next quarter. Is it next quarter or is it 6 months?
It's 6 months. It's a semi-annual.
So for this benchmark, it's 6 months, but for our business intelligence primary research, it will be sooner than that.
Okay, so everyone keep an eye out for that. And I'd like to invite everyone on the phone now to a webinar that Matt is going to be doing with 3 of the other senior analysts from different practices in mid-TBR. We're modeling it on the ESPN, what was it, around?
So it's basically, if you follow any of the ESPN programs where you have different analysts discuss various topics in sports, As a sports junkie, I particularly like Tony Reali and Around the Horn, and I figured why don't we do Around the Data Center, which is totally different according to the lawyers and no copyright infringement here. But we're going to have myself representing software, Patrick Heffernan representing services, Scott Dennehy representing networking, and Christian Perry representing data center. And we have 5 topics moderated by my boss, Lindy Hansen, who runs our cloud applications and professional services practice. And, so please attend that. We're trying something a little different, a little outside the box, and it could be really interesting. So I guarantee you, if nothing else, the 4 of us in a room will be contentious.
So if you haven't gotten that webinar invite, you can go to the TBR events page, and it's on April 16th. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the session. As I mentioned, we will be sending out the slides and the link to the recording to everyone within 24 hours. So by tomorrow, you shall have all the information. And if you need that before that, just either reach out to myself or to either Matt or Elizabeth, and we'll take care of that. I'm going to leave the chat function open for another few minutes for those of you who either want to set up a follow-up conversation or ask any additional questions. And if we don't hear from you now, we look forward to seeing you on additional webinars in the future. So have a great afternoon, everyone, and we'll talk to you then.